Trudy McIntosh joins me now from Canberra to discuss all of that and more. This inquiry into Scott Morrison's decision to make himself the minister for just about everything and then hide it, not just from voters, of course, Trudy, but from most of his colleagues, brought down today by former High Court Judge Justice Virginia Bell. Her report makes 6 recommendations, some pretty interesting observations. This one I picked up and I'll quote. The lack of disclosure of the appointments to the public was apt to undermine public confidence in government. Well, absolutely, I agree with that. Once the appointments became known, the secrecy with which they'd been surrounded was corrosive of trust in government. Take us through her recommendations, Trudy.
Peter, these recommendations really are technical ones regarding accountability and transparency, so that if a Prime Minister were to ever again seek to have these co-powers as a minister, that they would need to not only tell their colleagues and tell the Parliament, but most crucially the Australian people. The reason why the reporting date is today, the Prime Minister made this clear a few months back, that's because it gives the Parliament time next week to actually get this legislation through. That seems to be the intention, that they'll do that next week. The PM says he's accepted all 6 of these technical recommendations, and so the opposition's already provided bipartisan support before they even saw the recommendation, so likely to sail through next week.
Yeah, and so they should. I mean, I'm a Liberal. I have never seen anything like it. His excuse then, and still now, is this argument, look, if X minister or Y minister had got COVID, I needed to be sworn in as some sort of safeguard. He knows, I know, anyone who's worked in that office knows, there's already these really well-established protocols for continuity in government. You know, it's not just the case of COVID. You could have ministers, let's say, having a heart attack. There's a whole range of things that have been looked at before. This doesn't wash. Bell looked closely at that excuse, didn't she?
Well, she was explicit in this report saying that it was unnecessary, that there was not a need for that safeguard. As we saw there, she says that within a matter of minutes, the Prime Minister could have been sworn into those roles if that had been required. It's always never stacked up to me, Peter, that this argument about someone getting sick with COVID, because Peter Dutton was the first to contract COVID in March of 2020. He was in hospital for quite some time, and Scott Morrison never assumed responsibility for Home Affairs at that time. So it's always been peculiar of this reasons, this report incredibly scathing on that point.
And of course, when you've got ministers going overseas, when the Prime Minister goes away, if ex-minister's not sworn into someone else's portfolio, this happens routinely. I mean, I just think it's... We've never really got a proper explanation from the former Prime Minister, and I know it's corrosive of trust in his colleagues. We know, well, you'll go through it, but Josh Frydenberg still can't get over what happened to him. They were close. We all know Josh Frydenberg, when he was in Sydney, used to stay at Kirribilli House. When he was in Canberra, he stayed at the lodge with the Prime Minister. And you don't think over a bowl of cornflakes somewhere along the way Scott Morrison might have fessed up at what he's done?
It does seem like to be the real dagger for Josh Frydenberg, explicitly on the record today on the front of the 9 newspapers, hitting back at his, former boss in Scott Morrison and friend. He curiously says he's still friends with Scott Morrison, although he says that, yes, that's been damaged. But Josh Frydenberg making it explicitly clear he believes this was extreme overreach from the then Prime Minister to not even give him the courtesy of telling him that they were going to share that portfolio. Josh Frydenberg also going into detail about the conversation they had after this was made public. He said initially Scott Morrison didn't even apologise. What I found the most staggering is Josh Frydenberg puts to him, "You wouldn't have done that again if you had your time over." And Scott Morrison replied, "Yes, I would." So it's staggering. And I think the staggering part is it's also on the record. This was not on background. He put this firmly for everyone to see.
And I have to say, any Liberal supporters are cranky at me for being as tough on Scott Morrison as I am here. I can't find a Liberal MP, a former or current, who accepts any of this. I think it's embarrassing. I think it's terrible. I've got to call it as I see it. I think it's a real shame and a scar, I think, sitting on Scott Morrison's record. Let's go to the issue of the Uyghurs. There was a big delegation of Uyghurs in Canberra. These are Muslim ethnic Chinese, horrific systematic torture, forced sterilisation. They went to Canberra to tell their story, but they didn't get to meet with Foreign Minister Penny Wong. She declined to meet with them. Instead, she sent along one of her staffers. Now, I find this extraordinary. The claim was she was too busy. I don't buy this at all. There are plenty of times that I work for PMs and ministers, they've been busy. They've popped into a meeting if they can't carry the entire meeting. I hope that this isn't part of this a more compliant Australian foreign policy as a blood price for getting out of China's freezer. What do you think, Trudy?
Well, Peter, government sources have told me that it's not. They say that Penny Wong insists that she was quite busy on the day. She's obviously managing the Senate as well. There's a huge number of bills that were going through at the time. A spokesperson for her has told me that they sent a delegation of DFAT officials, government MPs as well. They insist that they'll continue to meet with members of the Uyghur community and that the government is going to continue to express our concern with the human rights abuses in Xinjiang in particular.
Well, the Senate's not sitting today. She could have had a meeting today.
Well, it had a special day today, actually. It did sit today just to go through this guillotine of bills. It closed at 2, I think, this afternoon.
There you go, 2:30, she could have had a meeting. David Pocock, he's digging in about these industrial relations bills. What can you tell us?
Yeah, he certainly is. He had a meeting, though, today with the Workplace Relations Minister, Tony Burke. I'm told that it was a good conversation, but that no deal has yet been struck. The sticking point for him has been whether small business, who's going to be affected by multi-employer bargaining. He wanted more time to consider that point over Christmas and into the new year. It doesn't seem like the government's willing to budge there. If we're going to read some tea leaves, though, Peter, about the Senate sitting schedule, late this afternoon, they've put the Industrial Relations Bill first up for Monday morning. That wasn't the case earlier in the day. So potentially they may know something is afoot on Monday morning, that we might be closer to getting a deal.
And now, we didn't caucus about our colours either. Love the pink there, Trudy. No one better across the Canberra brief than you. I really appreciate you joining us tonight. Thank you.